to funding crisis, the United Nations announces reduction in aid for Yemen. Oxfam says that military escalation amid landmines deepens suffering of civilians in the country. Amid Houthi militias collapse, government forces continue to make sustainable gains in Ma'rib. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rushan Fuad. The U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lenderking, expressed concern about the escalation of the conflict in Yemen, calling on the parties for de-escalation. Lenderking added that there is no military solution to the conflict in Yemen, confirming that the United States is deeply concerned about the increase in civilian casualties. The U.S. envoy outlined that the Houthi attacks during the past years were the main obstacle to peace efforts. He said that the Houthi attacks will only bring more suffering and only the path forward is through dialogue. The United Nations stated that it will reduce its aid in Yemen due to the lack of funding. The United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs confirmed that it will soon have to reduce the amount of food aid, which is provided to Yemen, to 11 million people. The office added that further reduction in the amount of aid is expected unless funding is received urgently. Funding shortages continue to impact the UN humanitarian operation in Yemen. In 2021, the Humanitarian Response Plan for Yemen received 58% of its funding requirements, leaving a gap of $1.6 billion. As a result, aid agencies are being forced to scale down and stop vital programs. More on the story is within the following report.
Warnings of funding shortages in Yemen are continuing to impact the humanitarian operation. In 2021, the Humanitarian Response Plan for Yemen received 58% of its funding requirements, leaving a gap of $1.6 billion. As a result, aid agencies are being forced to scale down and close vital programs. Emergency food assistance is being reduced for 11 million people across the country. The United Nations urged donors to sustain and increase, where possible, their funding to the humanitarian response in Yemen, which represents a lifeline to more than 16 million people. As economic collapse is the main driver of the humanitarian needs, the United Nations said in 2022 it will also be working closely with all stakeholders to promote a stronger economy in Yemen. 15 of the United Nations' 41 major humanitarian programs in hard-hit Yemen have already been reduced or shut down, and 30 more will be in coming weeks unless additional funding is received. Humanitarian actors in Yemen warn that the situation in the country is highly alarming. They stress that it is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, yet they don't have the resources that are needed to save the people who are suffering and will die if help isn't handed rapidly. In fact, the consequences of relief aids underfunding are immediate, enormous, and devastating. Between April and August last year, agencies have been forced to reduce food distributions, cut health services in more than 300 facilities, and hold specialized services for hundreds of thousands of traumatized and highly vulnerable women and girls. According to digits, only $1 billion out of $3.2 billion needed has been received. Now the call is directed to parties of the conflict to lift the blockade and do everything possible to minimize the impact of war on families and communities. Donors, in addition, have to stand in solidarity with the people of Yemen through providing the needed resources to nearly 80% of the population.
Yemen remains one of the world's most concerning humanitarian crises. Protracted conflict, destruction of infrastructure and basic public services, coupled with economic collapse, have caused unprecedented levels of food insecurity nationwide. The following report has more details.
The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Food Programme warned that acute food insecurity is likely to deteriorate further in 20 countries, or a situation called hunger hotspots, during the outlook period from February to May 2022. Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Yemen remain at the highest alert level from the previous edition of this report. In their last available assessments, these countries all had parts of populations identified or projected to experience starvation and death, requiring the most urgent attention. In Yemen, the latest available analysis issued in December 2020 projected rising catastrophic levels of food insecurity in 3 governorates and deteriorating emergency levels in other parts by June 2021. While increased humanitarian assistance by July 2021 contributed to a stabilization of food insecurity, recent data across the north and south of Yemen gives evidence of deteriorating trend in the food insecurity situation, while underlying drivers of food insecurity continue to deteriorate. Organized violence or conflict remains the primary drives, actual or potential, for acute hunger in the hunger hotspots and globally. Targeted humanitarian action is urgently needed to save lives and livelihoods in the 20 hunger hotspots. Moreover, in 4 of these hotspots, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Yemen, humanitarian actions are critical to preventing starvation and death. The report provides country-specific recommendations on priorities for emergency response, as well as expecting action to address existing humanitarian needs and ensure short-term protective interventions before new needs materialize.
Poverty in Yemen has seen increasing levels during the 8 years of war. People can find money to get their basic necessities. An urgent call is needed to alleviate their suffering. More is in the following report.
Yemen has become increasingly war-torn since 2014, and as a result, poverty in Yemen has significantly increased. The World Bank reports that more than 40% of households lost their main source of income, placing people under the poverty line, and the country is struggling to lift its people out of impoverished conditions. Poverty in Yemen holds one of the highest rates in the Arab world. Half of the population lives on less than $2 per day. Yemen's population stands at 25.4 million, and approximately 54% of those people live in poverty. A lack of jobs, even among graduates, has forced young adults to the streets, leading to even more widespread poverty in Yemen. A report done by the UNDP found that the instability in Yemen has had disastrous effects on Yemenis. It reports that 11.7 million individuals have become impoverished as a result of the war. In addition, 4.9 million are malnourished. Of this number, 600,000 are children under the age of 5. The report also found that the war reduced economic growth in Yemen by $88.8 billion. In addition, the Yemeni rial lost almost 75% of its value in the past years. This resulted in Yemen's status as the world's second least country in terms of income. Most of the population in Yemen doesn't have access to clean water and proper sanitation. 10 million people, nearly half of the population, go without enough food to eat. Child malnutrition rates are the highest in the world. Half of the children under the age of 5 are stunted. The UN estimates that approximately 80% of Yemenis are vulnerable to hunger. About 14.3 million are in need of medical assistance to combat malnutrition, along with other issues like starvation, cholera, and measles. Poverty in Yemen is frightening. Yemen demonstrates extremely poor standards of life expectancy, education, and overall living. This poverty crisis is related to the violence and chronic hunger in Yemen caused by the conflict. Yemen will continue to stay on track to become the world's most impoverished country by 2022 if the conflict does not end.
The Deputy Permanent Representative of Yemen to the United Nations said the number of children recruited into the ranks of the Houthi militia has reached more than 30,000 children. The official explained that children face terrible types of violations such as brainwashing their minds with sectarian and extremist thoughts before being thrown into fighting to serve the goals of the militia. In front of a meeting of UNICEF, the Yemeni official called for a review of monitoring and control mechanisms for violations against children in areas under the Houthi control. The Yemeni Landmine Observatory documented that 73 civilians were killed or injured because of the mines in January, the highest death toll ever in 1 month. Most of the casualties fell in the areas recently recaptured by government forces from the Houthis in the governorates of Shabwa, Hodeidah, and Ma'rib. Reports speak of more than 9,000 civilian casualties due to the mines planted by the Houthis since the beginning of the conflict in Yemen. A number of Houthi militants were killed and others were wounded in El Dala, south of Yemen. A military source clarified the Houthi militia launched an attack on the positions of the forces in El Juba and Sabira sector, but the forces managed to break the attack and inflict heavy losses on the Houthi militia. In El Jawf governorate north of Yemen, the government forces scored more gains in different fronts. Military sources said the government forces backed by the tribes attacked the militia positions in Laksha mountain and were able to take back 2 positions. They inflicted the Houthi militia losses in lives and equipment. In Ma'rib, the government forces advanced in Wadi el-Ghafra. A military source said the forces are in the middle of the area between Ma'rib and the capital Sana'a that is under the Houthi control.
Several fronts were opened in recent weeks by government forces and the giant brigades to defeat the Houthi militia, the last of which was in the north of Yemen, specifically in Hajjah governorate. The government forces managed to take the strategic city of Harad. This coincided with heavy losses in lives and equipment among the ranks of the Houthi militia. The rebels, in addition, went through very dark nights in the northwestern fronts of Ma'rib, with intensified battles waged by the government forces against the Houthi militia. The government forces pushed their way in new positions that were under the Houthis. They are approaching Al Jawf Junction after they secured the sites near Al Mas camp.
The morale of the enemy Houthi militia is broken. Good dwelling, we are moving from one victory to another. The victory will be in the side of the government forces. We will join forces with the giant brigades and will push our way beyond Juba, Bayda and Sana'a in the near future.
The acceleration of events in the course of the battles in Ma'rib are witnessing a relative calm on the southern fronts. While the Houthi militia seeks to launch furious attacks, they were inflicted with heavy losses in Ma'rib and Shabwa. The government forces' precise military strikes confuse the enemy and end up achieving their goals. They started from Shabwa, Ma'rib, and then in Hajjah in the north. Yemenis are waiting for the decisive strikes that will bring the end of the militia, as well as years of suffering for Yemenis.
Coming next. Displaced people in Hodeidah hit by diseases and are living conditions.
اضطرينا نحن نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستبقي كل يوم حوي كذا الله يستبقي.
Welcome back. Every day, the displaced people in Yemen are facing multiple challenges that threaten the return of their normal lives. These challenges are felt increasingly by these displaced people in Hais and Hodeidah on the western coast of Yemen. Mines in particular and other threats are still making their life hard. More is in the following report.
30 families have fled to this barren land located in the modest yards of Hais, bereft of sustenance and cloying with heat and chill alike, in exchange for survival. The war has robbed these families of home and comfort.
Our village lacks services. It doesn't offer health, food or nutrition. Until now, we haven't received beddings or blankets. Most of the children are sick because of the cold and the sun's heat. Mornings are hot, nights are frigid, and they have got nothing to cover themselves with. They are in dire need of sustenance. They are left to starve all day long.
The displaced families can secure no sustenance and they lack access to health care. They live here without the most basic necessities of life in a land that offers little more than widespread disease and starvation.
Since we have arrived, we have been in a state of food deprivation. We don't have tents to protect us from the showers of bombs that could drop on us at any second. We have got nothing. No support, no covers. All we have are 4 or 5 blankets with 8 or 10 families that need to be kept warm at night. The cold is killing us.
These tarpaulins, supplied by human rights organizations, may have relieved the families of the heat of the sun, but they did not protect them from the winter frost.
Our complaints are numerous. We've sick and disabled people in our midst. The tank can barely offer a day's worth of water. Some of us have no tents, and many of us are sick. There is no food. Most of our tarpaulins are shredded.
Families are still holding out hope that the IDP's Affairs Unit in Al Hodeidah Governorate will give their cause the gravity it deserves, and that the international humanitarian organizations will contribute to alleviating their suffering and providing the necessary needs for the family's survival.
Hundreds of truck drivers transporting goods in Lahj Governorate continue their open strike against new tolls. Drivers confirmed that their strike continued for the second week in a row, in protest of the silence of the local authorities in Lahj on imposing arbitrary financial levies which exceeded 100 riyals per trip at security checkpoints. The Yemeni oil company in Aden provided 40 private oil stations and other 5 stations in Lahj with gasoline and diesel to cover the local needs. The company confirmed the official price at 885 riyals per liter, bringing the price of a 20-liter container to 17,700 riyals, up from 13,500 riyals. Earlier, the Minister of Oil confirmed that the oil crisis was on its way to a breakthrough. The National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 25 new cases of the pandemic. Committee officials said 20 recovered cases were recorded and 3 deaths. The total recovered cases are 11,604, including 2,903 cases of recovery and 8,389 deaths. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Due to funding crisis, the United Nations announces reduction in aid for Yemen. Oxfam says that military escalation in landmines deepen suffering of civilians in the country. Amid Houthi militias collapse, government forces continue to make sustainable gains in Ma'rib. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. This is Rushan Fuad. Thank you for watching.